Hello and welcome to the Dial Global Virtual Lounge. This is a show where we discuss the future of the modern workplace and the impact of diversity, inclusion and belonging with the world's most successful and innovative leaders. Today, we are joined by three remarkable executives who all have a plethora of worldwide skills from various different backgrounds and all are passionate and enthusiastic about the sporting industry. Today on our virtual panel, we have Paul Cleal. Paul has a multifaceted portfolio of positions, working as non-exec and chair for Guy and St Thomas's NHS Foundation, Kingston University, NCS, the National Citizen Service Trust. He's a quality standard assessment panel member for the Premier League and also sits on the advisory board for the Sainsbury's Foundation. We have also Wayne Allison. Wayne is a technical director at League Managers Association. He's had a 22-year career as a professional footballer and at 8 different clubs. He moved into coaching and enjoyed spells as first team coach, development coach and assistant manager, and has had a lot of experience within the sports industry, gaining his UEFA coaching badges and pro license. We also have Colin Rattigan. Colin is a global executive, non-exec and digital transformation expert. He's had experience within the retail and also consumer sectors, very passionate about sport, and he actually has a lot of personal experience within the sporting arena. He's been on the GB athletics team, the GB long jump champion, Winter Olympics. He's passionate about bobsleighing and is director of the British Bobsleigh and Skeleton Association. And in addition to that, he's had a corporate career as well. He's worked for the likes of Adidas and worked in various different marketing director, global positions in addition. So huge amount of experience, which I could go on forever and a day about with all of our 3 panelists, but I won't. We'll get into today's session. Thank you all very, very much indeed for joining me.
My pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thanks very much. So guys, today we're going to be talking about not only leading in uncertain times, which I think is key given COVID-19, but also about a number of the different areas when it comes to diversity and inclusion within sport specifically and your respective careers. I think before we kind of get into representation in sport and what that means, I thought we could have a little bit of an open discussion when it comes to COVID-19. Obviously, sport has been massively impacted because those who are mainly home working now or in self-isolation cannot enjoy sports, which is for many an alleviation when it comes to day-to-day activities, perhaps stress of everyday life, and actually being able to release into enjoyment. And I wondered how COVID-19 has affected you all in your respective careers. And Paul, because I know we have a great relationship and I like to pick on you, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay.
Certainly, COVID-19 has, I haven't quite been furloughed. I'm a non-executive director, so I can't really be, but it certainly has led to a reduction in the amount of input that I think organisations are looking for from their non-execs at the minute.
Absolutely. And Wayne, how are you finding things? I know we touched there on football, and of course that's a very big part of what you do. Tell us about your experiences.
Yeah, and firstly, can I just say my thoughts and best wishes to everybody that's been affected by COVID-19, because it's terrible virus, and it seems to have not only affected them and their lives, but everybody else that's off that as well. So my thoughts and best wishes to them. Yes, it's affected football greatly. A national game, and we've been busier than ever at the League Managers Association, especially with dealing with the managers in terms of they are our members. We're a member association, and some managers, although managers can't be put on furlough, they have their thoughts and issues. Quite a lot of the managers are faced with making some really tough decisions which we all think that they shouldn't be making. Players are coming to them because they're the first port of contact and asking these questions. Well, can they go home? When can they do X? When can they do Y? Do they defer part of their salaries or do wage cuts? So all these things that the managers have to really, really consider, which they should be making. But it is a really, really tough time, and at least they know that the LMA is supporting them, whatever choices they make.
Thank you, Wayne. And Colin, how about yourself? Because I know that you're advising, CEOs and working with different organisations. Maybe less so on kind of the on the football side. But how are you finding things? And have you got any advice for those listening in?
I've been working largely on the continent, in Amsterdam and Paris most recently, and that's some of that work continues because you can work remotely. On the sporting side, it hasn't really stopped as such, because with the bobsleigh season just finishing, and we always use this month as preparation for the coming season. In fact, things have actually accelerated because we have the Olympics coming up in 2 years' time. So there is a number of things that we're doing in the background. First of all, we're really preparing for the selection of the Olympic squads. And so there's a lot of documentation, a lot of negotiation that happens with different bodies. And then there's also the issue of actually, as I said to you earlier, lack of sponsorship. So this is the most difficult time in this time period, you would have gone out and met sponsors and found some sponsorship. That we've had to do that remotely. And lastly, really helping the athletes prepare for the season as well, which we've been doing through done remotely once again through the use of Microsoft Teams to actually help coach the athletes and help to manage some of their training programs. So a massive impact for us, which will probably lead to us deferring our start of our training period. I think probably June is probably when we can first time I think we'll be able to get out and actually work together as a team.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for sharing, and similar yet different experiences there from all of you. So thank you very much for sharing those experiences. And one of the key things that we were very, very keen, and our members were very keen for us to discuss on today's show, was representation, or lack thereof it. And I wonder, before we got into that, because I do know a little about all of your personal backgrounds, and especially yours, Paul, I wondered whether we could share a little about your backgrounds, because I think the interesting thing about all of you is you have come from very different backgrounds, yet are all British, and have all found yourself in sports, which is really, really interesting. And often the journeys to those can be very, very different. And sports is something that as a nation I think everyone feels very passionate about. Why is it not represented in almost those visual the visual diversities, but also some of the invisible diversities that we have all talked about. So I wonder whether we could maybe share a little kind of personal background, and then we get into some of the meat on the bone around representation in all of its different facets, and what that looks like across the board.
So basically, I got into sport really through really a love for the sport through my father. My father was very big into sports, and also through the sort of encouragement from the teachers at school. And it wasn't actually not just like your typical PE teachers, but also I can always remember this guy's name, Mr. Sharma, my geography history teacher, who was very keen on me doing sport, was also very keen on having the balance between sport and education. So he always insisted that I work in school and educated myself, and was always tracking what I did in other lessons to ensure that I kept up to date with my education. At the same time, was helping me to progress in initially football was my initial sport, and then in athletics. In fact, he used to take me to the PE teacher, Mr. Sharma, used to take me to the sporting events because I had no other means of travel to the events because my parents didn't have a car. So that was my initial start in sports.
Thanks, Colin, for sharing. And I think the support that we get from others is absolutely key, especially in those young years. If we don't have, whether it be kind of mentors, whether it be have teachers who really want to invest personally in students' education to give them a foot up. So it isn't, as we will get into quite shortly, the privilege that get to enjoy things like sport, to be able to compete. And Paul, you've got a fascinating background. I wonder whether you could share a little bit about your family history, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Spot here, and kind of how you came to be involved.
Yeah, well, I grew up in South London with my mother. My father is from Cameroon in Central Africa, and I've got a huge family over there. He was actually born in Nigeria, but we've got a lot of family across the West African sort of coastline. But I grew up just with my mum here, and really, being of African background in the 70s, I was born in the late 60s, but growing up in the 70s, there was a lot of racism around. And I think for me, I found that sport, particularly playing football, was was the sort of route to acceptance, really, and being, you know, relatively good at football, not as good as probably certainly as Wayne, for example. But you know, it was a route to basically break down some barriers and get involved and, you know, become popular with other kids, if you like, through playing sports with them. So I think football for me was a critical sort of part of building my sort of confidence, relationships with other people, and kind of moving on. And as time went on and I got into a good school and then university, I sort of drifted away from playing so much as my business career started. So I had to sort of choose between, you know, studying and business and on the one hand, and continuing to play football on the other. So I took the sort of business route, and gradually over the course of my career, I've been sort of drawn back to sport, particularly football, partly in the early sort of 2000s, doing some financings around the stadium infrastructure business. I mean, being involved in Wembley, and in particular the financing of the Emirates Stadium at Arsenal, and also Ascot Racecourse Grandstand. So some sort of sporting financing work there. And then more recently, over the last 3 years, you know, getting involved with the Premier League, building on the diversity and inclusion work I've done throughout my career in financial services and professional services at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So it's been nice to be able to bring that experience of diversity from other sectors into football, and that's what we do when we go and see the clubs in the Premier League and talk to them about, you know, the progress they're making, and how, you know, better representation across, for example, different ethnicities, you know, people with disabilities, women, other aspects of diversity can be of benefit not only to the individuals themselves, but more importantly to the clubs and the communities that they're rooted in. So there are some big win-wins here in terms of being better at diversity and inclusion, and sport's a big part of breaking down barriers, as I found as a child. And you know, it's in many ways the reason why I was able to take my first steps towards a successful career in business.
Mm-hmm. I love that you've kind of gone full circle and the sport has drawn you back, as I think it has with everyone who is here. And interestingly, when you were talking there about the juxtaposition between choosing between business and sport, I think a lot of people feel that. And Colin, I know you're very, very passionate about making sure that there's a way that people can do both, but it's not so widely talked about. And, you know, are there things that we can do in the future that might help us be able to spearhead, you know, the two, so people don't feel that they have got to choose between one or another. But Wayne, coming to you, because you've had a really, you know, a fascinating background, very different from the guys, in that you obviously were a professional footballer for a number of years before you then flipped and went into the business side. So talk to us about your personal background, if that's okay.
Well, there's a couple of stories I won't mind sharing with you if you've got time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, go for it. Love to hear.
Well, one that sticks out in my mind, and it's right from a childhood, just like Colin mentioned about, we didn't have a car when we was growing up. And we talk about diversity. It's a case of there was only about 3 or 4 black families on a row of terrace houses in the whole street, which is quite poignant because it's gone the other way now. But the point I wanted to make was the football was always where I wanted to be. I knew that in my mind, but seemingly I always thought that my parents didn't really share that, or they didn't give me any feedback on that. So going through all my exams as a teenager, and at all levels at the time, and that was all I wanted to do, just be football. So I didn't revise as well as I should have done. That's what I'll say. So my final exam, raced home because I had to catch 2 buses to go and play at Halifax in the north, you see. So I've gone home, dumped my school bag down, got a sandwich, and just about to go out the door, my mum says, she's looking out with paper, she went, how did you do with your O-levels? Well, I just thought, well, yeah, okay. She never took an interest before. So I said, right, fine, no problem. Grab my bag. She said, oh, by the way, just before you go, I hope you don't think you're doing this football lark without any qualifications. Now, that was a bombshell because I knew what was coming. So all the way to the training pitch, I was absolutely gutted because I know that I didn't revise, and the likely outcome was going to be that I was going to fail them all. Subsequently, yes, I did. I failed every single one of them, and I wasn't allowed to go and do my apprenticeship. It was YTS at the time. Then I wasn't allowed to do that until I went to college and got some O levels to satisfy the entry criteria for my mother, if you see what I mean. So yeah, I did that, and it was great. Then I got onto the YTS scheme and started my footballing career there. But there was one thing in particular that stuck out in my mind when I was playing, and it was quite early on, late 80s, early 90s, and I won't mention the club or the player, but I was playing at this club down in London, and it was really, really tight. I was warming up, I was warming up, and I was getting a lot of racial abuse. It was really, really unbearable, because I was a youngish kid then, and got a lot of racial abuse. And I thought, wow, I better go to the bottom end, do my static stretches, and put my back to them. Right. The next thing I heard was a massive cheer, and it was one of their subs come out to warm up. The thing was that he was black, so he was warming up, and I knew him, and we stood there, and we're warming up together, side by side. I was still getting racial abuse. He was still getting cheers. And I turned to him and said, well, how can that be? He said, well, it's quite easy. You're the opposition black. And that just put things in perspective. I was shocked. And it was just one of those things where I didn't quite get my head around it. So anyway, I went in, and it took me a while to actually process what he meant and to put that in perspective for the whole career. So it was one of those where I gradually got over it, and then took sport for what it was, because it divides people, and it also brings people together. That's the nature of it. And I looked at it as, it's going to bring me together with other people. And if people are bigots, if people are racist, that's their issue. That's not my issue. But I can help try and educate them to bring them forward along with me, in order to make the game a better game, which I like to say that it is a better game than the late 80s and 90s, but things started to creep in again over the last 5 or 6 years, which were inappropriate and unsavory, but we have to eradicate that and bring people together again. So leaving that, had a half-decent career, enjoyed it. While I was doing that, I was doing my degree, did a PhD, did all my coaching qualifications. And the reason why I think that drove me to do that was because I only thought my career was going to last until I was 30. Well, as an average player, you see, so that's where that came from. But as it was, it lasted till I was 39. So it gave me an opportunity to do my qualifications, and my only point was that I wanted to be employable by the time I'd finished. If I wanted to go for a job, all they could say to me was, I haven't enough experience, not that I wasn't qualified enough. So that really what drove me a little bit. A job came up at the FA. It was nice to get into it. It started off with their coaching research manager, then moved into coaching research, then into the diversity aspect, helping more underrepresented coaches get employment, get bursaries, etc. And then leaving there, they went to the LMA, which was helping more managers. So yes, it wasn't a linear pathway.
Fascinating career, Wayne. Thank you ever so much for sharing. And if you don't mind, I'm going to pull on one of those, quite heavy subject actually, which is racism and tokenism. Because when you were telling that story, whilst I was having a giggle, because you tell the story so kind of colourfully, it can't help but make you smile. About kind of being the opposition black, as you said in inverted commas. But at the same time, it also makes me a little bit angry, because I think, well, in a way, everyone is equal on the playing field, so to speak, which is fantastic. It does break down barriers, as you say. But on the other side, why is it such that those from ethnic minorities have got to work that bit harder in order to come up to what is the norm? And I know Colin and Paul, from speaking with you both, I think, Paul, you told me, a story before where, I think it was in your corporate days, and, it's kind of like, oh yeah, but you're okay. And it's like, well, because you proved yourself and whatever, but it's almost, it's like that tokenism, piece. I don't know how to more articulately put it, and I'm sure Colin or Paul, you will put it more articulately than me. But that tokenism and that singling out of a particular, in this case, visible characteristic, that then if you are great at something and you prove yourself in inverted commas on the pitch or wherever it is in the workplace, that then you become okay and well, you're now included and you're welcome in the group. That makes me so angry.
Yeah, and that does happen. I mean, I think sometimes when if like me, you've got a career and you're a senior partner in the world's biggest professional services firm, everyone imagines that you went through life, without experiencing any grief from anybody at any time. It's kind of a reasonable assumption, I guess. So the people kind of weren't around when you were, driving down a street in South London and get stopped for no reason by the police, or when you get stopped at a ticket barrier and taken to one side by the officials and for no good reason, just because they don't like the look of your hair and your coat. But you're not wearing that coat when you go to work with a suit and tie on, and you do get treated differently according to the context and according to your age, and as you move in different circles, and obviously your experiences change. I think it's important not to forget those experiences. And I think one of the things I said to you later when we were talking was that the first piece of advice I remember getting from my mum when I was 5 was she sat me on her knee and said that basically because of your colour you're going to have to be better than everyone else to get the same. And actually, when you think about it, that's not bad advice for anybody, whatever colour you are, whatever your whatever description you fit. Just there's a lot of competition in life, and you need to set out to be better than others. Yeah, it's not fair, but there's a lot of evidence still. There's a lot of discrimination still in the labour market against ethnic minorities, and I guess it's the experience of immigrant communities throughout history everywhere in the world that you don't turn up and expect favours from the sort of resident population, and you don't get them. And you do have to work harder, despite what some of the papers sometimes say. That's why I think it's important that those of us who become role models in senior positions in society, in business, etc., try and put something back and help people along who are coming along behind us.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And it's very, very easy when you're all obviously senior, working for big organisations, to think, oh well, they must have just kind of magically appeared here, but those looking in have not seen the struggles and the the lack of car and the requests to have lifts when you were youngsters, etc., and seen that turbulent many years of struggle ultimately. But I guess on the flip side, and I love that there's always a positive spin on things with all of you, is actually utilising and harnessing those difficult times and channeling that energy or that anger or that that verbal abuse ultimately that comes through via racism into other things is great. And I'd say that to anyone who is listening in, is listen to these stories of the guys who are here. They've all had it hard, but you've all managed to come through it. And on that note, role models of course are absolutely imperative, because I do believe if you can't see it, it's very hard to envisage that you would be it. When it comes to representation, what have your experiences been across all your different respective sports? Because I think everyone likes to think, as a nation and worldwide, oh, things are getting better. And to a degree, they are. I was talking to the CEO of the Rugby League World Cup 2021, John Dutton, and they're getting involved in rugby for those in wheelchairs and those from all different areas and women and such like. But still, I think we can all agree there's a huge way to go still. What have your experiences been over the years, and what are you seeing now when it comes to representation in your individual industries?
I'm not entirely convinced that things aren't necessarily getting better. They're different. I think to go back to a point that Wayne touched on as being, I guess, a similar experience to me, being one of the few black kids around at the time, and it being very different now. Some of the people I mentor in schools around here in Southwark in London, I go to the school and the kids are 90% African. It's a very different experience growing up. So what you're seeing in senior levels of organisations hasn't changed a great deal in the corporate sector. from an ethnicity perspective, for example. It's got slightly better from a gender perspective.
Yeah, of course. We were talking about the Sir John Parker review, weren't we? And it's moved 0.6%, which, whilst it is an improvement, it is not exactly something to be celebrated. 0.6% movement.
But per head of population, it really hasn't changed a great deal. And the research in the labour market suggests that the level of discrimination against people with, for example, foreign-sounding names, whether they be Nigerian or Pakistani, and there's lots of surveys been done over the last 50 years, and there's not an awful lot of difference in terms of the degree of discrimination. But obviously what we do have now is much greater numbers in terms of minorities. So even with a constant level of discrimination, the sheer weight of numbers will get you more people visible in a lot of organisations, and that's what's happening. And obviously in sports, and that's one area where it's arguably more of a meritocracy than businesses on the pitch in particular. You start to see, the same is true in performing arts, you see many more people from minorities getting through because people ascribe being good at those sorts of things to perhaps a positive stereotype cases to, for example, black people in sport and music. But of course that stereotyping doesn't stretch as far as Asians in football, for example. They get a negative stereotype. So I think there's progress, visible progress, and more role models. But as I say, when you take into account the greater numbers, then I'm not sure we're making leaps and bounds forward.
But why is that we're not making leaps and bounds forward? Because I've been out the country for about 16 years, and when I left, there was a movement for more diversity and more equality. And coming back, what I found, there isn't. I think these things have progressed backwards, as Wayne said. They haven't moved forward. And I think one of the things that, even in sport, I used to be a footballer, and the reasons why I switched from being a footballer was that, one day, my dad didn't often come to the matches to watch me, and the one day he did come, the amount of racial abuse I got from the stands, as a small kid playing for the county team, he just said that was enough. There's no way that a child should actually have to suffer that sort of abuse. So that's why I end up switching to athletics than staying in football. And also I think the thing about football is that it can be quite subjective in who gets through. In athletics, it's very cut and thrust. You're either first past the line or you're not. In football, one of the reasons I find that a lot of Asians haven't progressed is that because it's so subjective, and there's this almost sort of negative stereotype about Asian players, they never pass through. Yeah. Whereas you look at Germany, whereby you have a more sort of a flat system and more, you pass through on your merits, they're producing Asian players. And we've got far more Asians here and we're not.
Yeah, and I think those stereotypes are very real. And I commented that in some senses football on the pitch is meritocratic. It is to a point, in the sense of you have to be good to make it and get in the first team and progress up the leagues. But yeah, there are some major biases within academies, for example, as you say, lack of Asians. And I think what's interesting, though, is when you compare the level of diversity on the pitch in the average Premier League club, you move off the pitch, into the offices, then you see something completely different. And even, as Wayne will know, within coaching in particular, the diversity drops away, alarmingly, and that's been the case now for, 25, 30 years.
Yeah, it's just they've tried to different initiatives in terms of the recruitment code, the recruitment processes that clubs have, but just it's similar to playing. Just like what Colin mentioned, it's that where in order to get on to be on the coaching staff or a manager, there isn't a robust interview process, or there's no. In some cases, there's no HR involved. So it is a handshake, it's a conversation, and you can get the job. So in any walk of life, where is that acceptable? We've got a huge talent pool of talented, bear me, female workers out there that aren't getting the rewards that they deserve. Highly qualified, great insight. They're like I say, talented, got loads of experience, but really can't get through that door, and that's a shame for me. It's I think we can do it. I think the whole process, recruitment processes, can need reviewing and changing, in my view.
Yeah, and I think you're right about this whole thing about objectivity and subjectivity. I mean, Colin makes a very good comparison with athletics, because if you run the 100 meters in 10 seconds flat and someone else runs it in 10:20, they don't suddenly say, "Oh, well, the guy who came second, he ran really nicely, didn't he? And he looked good." So I mean, it doesn't happen. So, but you've got clear objectivity in that sense. There may not be equal access to training facilities that help you to get that extra 20 seconds, but you've got objectivity about what performance is. And obviously, even within football, people are arguing, aren't they, about whether someone's carrying some midfielder or not, whether he is really any good and stuff like that. But it gets worse clearly once you get off the pitch and into management coaching, where the ability to measure the value added of, I don't know, Jose Mourinho is pretty tricky. It's getting hard by the look of it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And you all touched there on what is ultimately, to a degree, elitism. And we talk about the handshake, the informality. Yes, I think that's definitely responsible. Comes down to those hiring managers and to perhaps the lack of HR process. If it's acceptable it would not be acceptable, should we say, in many other industries which are far more regulated. Yet on the other side of the coin, football and other sports can be, to a degree, elitist and not particularly inclusive to those who have come from, kind of impoverished communities or those that are, perhaps more working class. And so, I wonder whether we can kind of discuss, experiences around this, more specifically, the fact that people who watch elite football aren't massively diverse, also reflecting the game's white working class male roots. I think there's something which is really quite fascinating within that piece there as well. And even so much into other sports, be it some of the racing car pieces which require a huge amount of money to get off the ground. And so for many, even though the consumer base and those who are fans of the various different sports would never be able to afford to actually get involved, even though they are very active participants.
I think a lot of it comes down to, the word you use sometimes, Lola, but belonging, and people don't necessarily feel like they belong when they go to a football stadium if they don't fit the traditional stereotype. And that, it never put me off. I had some pretty unpleasant experiences in the early days of going to watch football, but I kept going because I love the game so much. But I know a lot of people who wouldn't go and still wouldn't go even now because of what they feel is likely to be what they might be subjected to within the stadium. So that's still an issue, and feeling you belong is a critical part of being included in the first place. It's the other side of an organisation or an industry being inclusive. The individual has to feel included themselves and belonging. And I think sporting organisations need to work very hard. You can't it's not enough just to advertise equally. You have to kind of encourage some underrepresented groups in and make clear signals that they're welcome, and then treat them well when they get there. And that combination is not always in place. And going back to the point about discrimination and subjectivity, I think people simply just use shortcuts and they match certain types of people with jobs and roles and activities just because historically that's what people have looked like. And you see that with people coming out of Oxford and Cambridge going into the civil service. Seen that lots. Done politics, philosophy and economics at Oxford, then you're in. And similarly, if you've got a Glasgow accent in football management, then you've got a better than even chance, it seems to me. And because people make those associations.
One of my
can I make a point there?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just on what Paul was saying there, what immediately sprang to mind, and it's not just in football, and it is when Paul was saying about the reach. It's making people feel inclusive, and the term that really grates with me is these initiatives. When people say they always say, well, we're trying to get to the hard to reach areas. Now those communities, those areas are not hard to reach. I just class that as lazy. Mm-hmm. You can get out and have touch points with the communities if you want to. It just depends how much you really want to do this, and it shows whether they'll play at it or do it seriously. But I really can't do with the hard to reach areas. It really is great.
Mm-hmm.
Is it an issue that there is a There is if I look at in certain sports, the reasons why minorities may not participate in the sport because they don't see a role model and they believe that they will not be accepted, as Paul was saying earlier, and therefore they won't participate. So to overcome that barrier, doesn't that sport require some sort of proper initiative to actually bring them on board, to actually some sort of inclusion process? Because that's what they do in Germany, for example. Why are there so many, even you have a top black German tennis player, because they go out and they have initiatives to actually recruit people and move them through the system. I think we kind of play lip service on many occasions in this country, and it's just dotting the I, crossing the T's. But in reality, is it a real initiative to bring you on board? Sometimes I don't believe so.
I absolutely agree, first of all, with everything that you've all said there. And my bugbear, just to tap onto the end of yours there, Wayne, is where people say, yes, but it's about it's about the skill. When it comes to recruitment, it's about the skill. It just just so happens to be that person is identical to everyone else that sits on our board. It's about the skill, and it's like, hello, we need to think outside of that. It comes to emotional intelligence and people's experience. It's not a case of positive. Well, I've heard it deemed as positive discrimination. I was talking to someone about a piece of search the other day, and you probably all know that I run an exec search business, and I call it lazy recruitment when people don't have a diverse candidate slate. The same would correlate when it comes to hiring players or whatever it might be. But it really is making sure that there is a balanced candidate slate, and anything else is unacceptable and lazy. The amount of times, I'd be a millionaire if I was given a penny for every time someone said to me, we just hire on skill. We don't mind what colour they are. We don't mind what gender they are, but it's just about the skill. And it's like, oh, well, it's very convenient, isn't it? Without being too forthright, that person is identical to your board. And so, those that say, I hate quotas and I don't believe in them, I have to say, I really do challenge it. I think the word quota, unfortunately, has got a very nasty connotation to it. I think if we looked at, equal representation of the community or something which was less elongated than that, it would give a far nicer slant to it, because the word quota sounds awful. And those who may be black or minorities or Asian or whatever, of course, don't want to think they've got the job because they happen to be the only female or the only black person in the room or whatever it is. But there needs to be an equal split. And so I do believe fundamentally that we have got to put in certain lines in the sand, like you say, Colin, because clearly countries like Germany, Sweden, incredibly far progressed when it comes to diversity and inclusion strategies. These are everyday ways of life. I just wonder whether we are a little too lackadaisical about our approach to these strategic pieces, with recruitment or representation in fact in all different facets of diversity and inclusion.
I was going to say, I think there's a lot of complacency that expect that things will eventually change. And I think in the end, things, Colin asked me why do things not change? And I think in the end, things don't change because people don't want them to change enough. And if you really want something to change, then you can usually change it. And it's amazing how quickly, we're seeing how fast the world's having to react in this current COVID-19 situation. It proves that people can, get things done pretty quickly, build a new hospital in a few days, that sort of stuff can be done. But people would have said it can't be done. So you got to want to do it. And I think, people question, I think often, they talk about the business case for diversity and inclusion and question whether it really exists. And then there's the implication that if we have more people from other backgrounds, then there'll be some lowering of the standard, that sort of stuff. But no one ever kind of asks, why is there the over-representation of, certain groups? Why are there more, white men in senior business positions than the stats would suggest should be right?
Absolutely.
There's no business case that ever led to that happening. It just happened.
Absolutely. We all know there's a business case there, and to a degree I've almost given up throwing metrics at people, because it's like, well, at some point, I had someone say the other day, I quoted them all metrics under the sun, and I said, what's the worst that can happen? Honestly, what's the worst that can happen? Sometimes I think it's just having that emotional pull and giving someone a chance. It's not rocket science. But anyhow, Wayne, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah. You mentioned what's the worst that can happen. I can give you an example of. I'm all for the recruitment code and getting people BME and female into positions at clubs, but only when it's done properly. And the recruitment has to be done well, and with the, like I said, mentioned earlier, there's a lot of quality people out there, and that's what it's all about for me. It's quality. So with the quotas, like it's not being done effectively in football, especially in the academies. They'll say, right, okay, we need more BME coaches, so we need 10 in the academy setup, or blah blah blah. What they tend to do then, and when you say what's the worst that could happen, what they tend to do is saturate the market with mediocrity. So just to tick, yeah, we've got 10. Now those 10 might not be great. Don't just give it to the 10, because at the end of the day, it's the players that would suffer. Absolutely. I'd rather give it to the 5 BME who are top quality and wait for another 5 to come maybe 6 months' time, rather than do it all in one go like that. That's what I think, that's the worst case that can happen.
Yeah. And to play on the worst case scenario, I would also say I have seen instances in, you know, again, not mentioning any companies here, but I've seen instances where companies have thought, ooh, we better do something about our diversity and inclusion strategy. There's no women, there's no BAME representation, there's no disability, whatever. And they have done exactly what you have said there, Wayne, and they basically panic hired. They panic hired, you know, the first person that walks through the door. And unfortunately, because those people then aren't, as you say, quality, it backfires. And either they think, oh my goodness, this person isn't great, or the person could be great if they had the right kind of dedicated help and attention, because they don't get it. What you end up with is organ rejection. The organ rejection happens, the company spits out this diverse, in inverted commas, candidate, and all of a sudden people go, well, we tried it. We tried it and it didn't work, and so we've gone back.
See, I told you.
Yeah, I told you so. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I told you so. There's nothing more infuriating than that expression, is there? But yeah, sorry, Colin, were you going to say something there? Because I was
because I think what's missing when you have these initiatives, and particularly when you recruit a BAME candidate into a company, is a supporting structure. Because quite often in the company, it's not just about having the title or the position. It's also having the networks, you know, knowing the business well enough, having the people the go-to people that can assist you. And that supporting structure is not actually there to set you up for success. And of course, you're going to fail because you don't have a support structure, and therefore there is exactly what Wayne says. They point the finger and says, "There you go. You know, we tried it. You know, failed. We won't recruit anymore." But and that's the problem. That I feel that's where some companies who've gone out there and they picked up the wrong candidates, or not having the right support structure, people have failed, and therefore they don't recruit any more BAME candidates. I think that's happening in football as well with some of the football managers. In for whatever reasons, the manager may not be doing so well. So do you kick them out after the first season, or after the season is gone? Why don't you actually put some sort of support structure around the person to help them? They don't do that.
Absolutely. And it reverts all the way full circle, almost in a way, back to kind of elitism and privilege, because the lack of support structure, the lack of networks, the lack of viewing through the lens of an individual that hasn't been granted those privileges from day dot is the hard thing to do. And I think when you've not walked that walk, it's very hard to be able to fully understand that. And so you presume the same support structures, or lack thereof, is what is intended, I guess. And, you know, thank you all very, very much. I'm conscious of timing here. And what we actually did was we reached out to our members and on LinkedIn with a number of individuals that were very enthused at the prospect of us doing this DIAL Global Virtual Lounge today. So I've had a whole plethora of questions for all of you individually. And I know already we're not going to have time to go through all of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select out a couple. But just before we do that, what I would love to do there is kind of just summarize from each of you a couple of key action points that organizations and people and businesses can do, because I want to shout out to anyone that is listening, whether you're in charge of an organization, whether you've got some kind of influence, within your respective field, to actually be able to push and move the dial, be it mentoring, structures, representation, etc. Key points, guys, or requests from those who are listening in from each of you. Very quickly.
Well, I'd say that organisations, or what I'd like to see people do, is really make a commitment. It goes back to what Wayne was saying about quality. Make a commitment to genuinely looking to get the best people for their organisation at all levels, and then putting in place the right sort of systems and processes to support that, and not leaving it to chance. I think if you take those two things, real genuine commitment to outcomes, and then taking the processes that you need to put in seriously, then you get somewhere if you want to.
Absolutely.
I would echo that, and just based on what we've been saying and what Colin's mentioned as well, is that the support network has to be around these talented people, in order to nurture their capabilities. Because I think if we have that support structure, and given that the talent pool is strong anyway, that we all know it is, then coupled with an open and transparent recruitment process, then we'll see a rate of change, and I think that's fundamental in my mind at the moment.
Thank you, Colin.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
What I'd add to that is the selection criteria for the candidates needs to be quite sound and open, because I think with a proper open selection process with the right criteria, not a criteria built on who's in the company, but what is required to actually be successful in that role, I think you'll get a better class of candidate being attracted to that company or to that sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you very much. Indeed, some fantastic points there, and lots of words of wisdom that I hope everyone can take back with them. So coming into some of the questions from our members, and I've got some individual questions for you here. Unfortunately, we can't get through them all, but what I will say to everyone who is either probably listening to this on demand, please do write in, and happy to share questions with the guys, or do reach out to them on LinkedIn. They're very busy, so if they don't come back to you straight away, do bear with them. But Paul, I'm going to come to you first with a couple of questions here. One of our members, or a couple of our members actually asked, and first of all, actually, sorry, there's a few congratulations for your OBE as well, so many congratulations.
Thanks very much, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thanks, yeah. Haven't been to the Palace, obviously, because of the postponement due to the current crisis, but
no.
that was due on the 30th of April this year, but that'll be at some point in the future.
Meeting the Queen.
Paul, I'm sending you a virtual bow.
Thank you very much.
Virtual bows all around. So Paul, why did you decide to leave PwC after 15 years to move to Africa, and also where in Africa? I actually know the answers to these questions, but for those at home. Yeah,
well, I actually left PwC in London to go to Africa with PwC. So I joined the board of the firm's Africa practice, which covers the whole continent more or less. The big three territories are South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, and I chose to be based in Nigeria. So actually, Lagos is the city of my father's birth, so I was keen to experience what it was like to work in Africa. I've had a long-standing commitment, some of it working with my late father to work on health and development issues in the continent. And yeah, it was an ambition of mine to go and see what it was like to actually work in Africa and find out exactly how difficult life in Lagos is. And the answer is it's quite difficult.
Wow.
But I learned a lot in a very short space of time. I did some work as advisor to the then governor of Lagos State on sort of strategic priorities for government, and it was very, very challenging to see. And you imagine the situation there now, where the level of resources to deal with the crisis that we're currently facing globally is tiny compared to the scale of the problem, and the level of problems that you're facing in a city like Lagos are far greater than we have to deal with here in London. We're really very lucky, and you see how much we're struggling with this crisis, and I think everyone's praying that things don't go badly in Africa, because the resources simply aren't there in a lot of those countries to fight back. But I was there basically to try and help build capability within government to respond to this sort of thing, coming on not long after the Ebola crisis, actually, which happened back in 2014.
Wow.
So yeah, that was the main reason why I went out to Africa, just to experience it and see what I could contribute. And I think probably I had some naive ideas about how things might be before I went. Got a lot of experience of living, also working with family and being out in Central and West Africa. But the reality of being there day to day, working in government was tough. But yeah, fascinating. And I chose to leave PwC actually when I came back from Nigeria, rather than take another role in the firm here.
Thank you very much, Paul. And actually, that's answered another question that someone else asked, so I'm sure that will be pleasing to them. But the difference between the UK and Africa, which you've been really articulate about, actually there. And for those that haven't travelled overseas or worked abroad, I'd massively encourage it. I worked in Uganda actually for a month on an orphanage, and it just changed my life. It really, really did. And so I think anyone who hasn't experienced working within other countries definitely should, or some experience in one form or another. I think you will learn something huge. And Colin, I had a number of questions for you. Well, first of all, actually, someone who was asking how big the rivalry is with Adidas and Nike, because had seen that you had a corporate career, of course, within some of the big old brands, which really are household names, but also someone very quickly who has asked, how any advice that you would have about being able to actually do both sport and business at the same time, because it's really, really tough, I think, for people to be able to keep up both at the same time and to actually be forced to choose. So I wondered whether you might be able to answer those questions.
Sure. I'll pick up the Nike Adidas rivalry first. That's actually quite huge.
Really?
Really huge, yes. Always. Initially, Adidas used to be the bigger brother, and now Nike's the bigger brother. And as in any family, there's always some degree of rivalry between siblings, and it's quite huge between the two companies. In terms of balancing your sport and work life, I mean, what I found was always trying to be organized. And as I referred to earlier, I had some assistance from the teachers in my early years in terms of ensuring that I created a schedule so that I knew when I had to train and how much work I had to put in, and ensuring that I balanced the two, that I didn't do too much sport and not enough studies, and also to ensure that you are meeting the grades that you need within your education as well. So that's really about how you manage your time. And it's always a lot of temptation these days. There's TV, there's gaming, there's a lot, social media, that you don't overdo those areas and not balance your time between the sport and education. It's very important. Prioritize, exactly why what Wayne said earlier. It's getting that right balance, because you have a very short lifespan in sport, and you have to remember that.
Capitalize on it. Thank you, Colin. Yes. And Wayne, to yourself, I've got a question here actually from a chief people officer who used to play in the level below where you played as a pro footballer, who is, first of all, commends you on the football career, and then asked, why did you decide to change, or evolve rather, from managing and coaching clubs into more recent roles of diversity and inclusion, and also the current role?
Quite easily, really, because I found myself out of work a lot. So through probably, I think, no fault of my own, being with managers who got dismissed. And at first I was only out of work for about 3 weeks. Then I got another role. Then I got dismissed and out of work for, I think, about 6 months. And then it was a year and a half. And I just thought that I can't keep doing this. And I need some sort of stability in my life. I can't just be scratching around. I tried some other professions. I went into teaching for a bit, and boy, that was hard work. So I just thought, no, I've got to stick to something that I know more about, and be that bit more longevity. So yeah, I think it was security and the willingness to do something different. I'm always receptive to that, and it was a case of well, I wasn't quite sure if I could try it, see if I like it, and take it from there.
I bet there's a lot of parents listening in where you said there that the teaching is pretty tough. Sure, the parents listening in are thinking, oh my God, that's absolutely the case. We're homeschooling our kids at the moment. Let's get them back to school ASAP.
Exactly. Yeah, it is hard work, and they deserve a lot of credit. They really do.
I worked at a nursery in a primary school, actually, for a brief time when I was younger, and obviously taught out in Uganda. And I mean, actually less so in Uganda, but more in the UK nursery. Never have I been so exhausted coming back to the day's work. Oh my good God, I just not want to talk to anyone at all. And finally, because there have been quite a lot of questions here around representation, but what I'm hoping for everyone who is listening that we have covered off a number of those. People are asking kind of why there are not more black players within football, why there are not more women in management roles, etc. But I think again we've covered a lot of those off. And so I'll ask this one last question to all of you before we summarise for today, because I just cannot believe we've been here for an hour already. But when someone asked of you, and I'm actually going to ask this and throw it out to everyone, is you played at 8 different clubs. Is there one and the same culture regarding diversity and inclusion, or is it an industry issue? And to Paul and Colin, again, you both had experience in football and in other different sports as well. What are the attitudes and kind of behaviours? Is this a holistic problem across all clubs and sports and such like, or is it very different culturally as per club?
Well, I'd say that, there are different cultures everywhere, and within the big 4 professional services firms, for example, the cultures will be slightly different. I see different cultures and different ways of doing things as I go around different football clubs, and different cultures in the health service where I work as well. Universities, all different. But I think there are some common points, and some of the issues around representation, the core reasons behind it, are there in society for historical reasons. They are long-held stereotypes and prejudices that get in the way of people's judgment and mean that the judgment isn't always objective. A lot of it, stereotypes exist because, as I mentioned earlier, there are people look to have shortcuts. Really, they're kind of lazy aids to decision making, but they're often wrong because they're built on incorrect assumptions and history. There are some underlying societal attitudes that run through pretty much every industry and every firm and every organisation, as far as I can see. There are differences of degrees, of course, but a lot of the problems date back to some very, very long, 300 or 400 years or longer held beliefs that are quite deeply ingrained in many people. Often at a subconscious level, has to be said.
Absolutely. And
I actually find that it's individuals can make a difference, because my experience is that in certain companies I've seen where there's been more sort of inclusion, a bit more diversity and nurturing, is where you've had an individual, maybe through some experience or some education or whatever, they have been able to actually allow the door to be opened to a far more diverse workforce. And attractive a very different group of people. And I think it's the individual at the end of the day, despite what you are educated, despite what history has told you, I think can make that difference. And it's identifying that individual is going to make that difference for that individual in the job or in the company.
Thank you. And Wayne, finally.
I think there's 3 main parts to this, especially in football. 2 different parts for recruitment. On the playing side, with the players, moving from club to club doesn't matter. The club and the manager, they have a more diverse team, the represented team. They don't care so long as they've got a good team, so they can have a makeup of anybody. So moving from one to the other is great, because all players are alike, and we'll get on and we all play. The difference in, I think, what Paul mentioned earlier is that it's not just playing and coaching roles in football. There's the back office, there's an office staff, there's admin staff, there's sports scientists, etc., etc. And that needs a different type of recruitment in terms of getting that balance and a more diverse balance. So it seems like at one end, they would openly be more diverse with the playing staff. But when it comes to the management and the back office staff, they're less inclined to be diverse. And the other point that I want to make is that in football, I would say, with the players, with the management, with the staff, everybody's diverse. It just seems like it's the fans have got this tribal nature, and they don't like players moving from one club to the next and things like that. So I think that's where possibly most of the tension arises.
I like how you describe it as tribal nature there. I did once go to a football game, actually, and they were like animals. I mean, it was so much fun. It was amazing.
Yeah.
But I was kind of like, whoa, won't verbalize some of the obscenities I heard. But it was
frightening.
No, absolutely was. It absolutely was. But some great points there from all of you, and thank you ever so much, all of you, for taking the time to be involved. I know how busy and such all of you are with your respective careers, so I really, really appreciate you being here today. And we'll just do a quick summary before I wave goodbye to all of you today. So, first of all, I think there's been so many learning points, and what I think has been really, inspiring for me, and I hope for those who have been listening in, is the personal stories, the stories of struggle, but have resulted in ultimately a really wonderful outcome for each and every one of you. You've all had these fantastically colourful careers, and are enjoying, really, the fruits of your labour. And I hope that everyone who is watching and who is listening in can see that. Hard work does genuinely pay off. It's not just a kind of a slogan, or something that is said, as just kind of a catchphrase to throw away. Hard work really does pay off. And so don't let anything stand in your way, whether it be that you are lacking when it comes to, finances, seek out people who want to help. These three individuals here have all talked about the importance of representation and mentorship, and all of you are genuinely absolute role models for those, not only just in the BAME community, but for guys and girls who have, perhaps, come from backgrounds that aren't as privileged. I think social mobility is something that we really ought to be talking about more, and being able to move people, into upward social mobility from areas that aren't so privileged, because that skill and that raw talent clearly exists. You guys are genuine kind of living proof for that, indeed. And I think, some of the shout outs and some of the summary pieces that I would say to businesses and individuals listening in are, do as the guys say, and make a commitment to get people at all different levels. And don't just say it, don't just pay lip service to it. Make sure that this is not left to chance. Make sure that there's commitment to those specific outcomes by putting measurable pieces in place. And that doesn't mean lazy hiring, lazy recruitment. It doesn't mean hiring the next female or black person or Asian person that comes along. It means looking at quality individuals and putting time, effort and money into looking at communities that are, full of wonderfully, interesting and unique backgrounds. They are not hard to find. Look at the metrics for this country. We represent a diverse, holistic community of individuals. So tap into those and harness that talent, because I tell you, if you don't, it is going to be a massive competitive disadvantage in the future, because leaders of next generations, millennials, they want to see businesses, they want to see organizations that care about every person, not just certain groups of people. And so finally, what I would say is, some of those stories about kind of, having tough times, facing racism, anyone who is listening to this right now in business or in sport who is suffering from times like that, keep on pushing on, because you know what? Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Again, a reflection of that is the guys that we have on the panel today. You can do it. You have to have, a bit of confidence, a bit of a leg up. Reach out, find mentors, find people that care, reach out to us. There's individuals here. Don't be scared of seniority. Don't be scared of LinkedIn. Utilize it. Some great people out there and people that genuinely want to help. So please do take note and, join us again on the podcast and on the panels. As always, you can visit us at www.dialglobal.org. And what we're doing, especially to support COVID-19, is we're actually putting out a lot of additional free content. And so everything today will be available on the COVID-19 Hub. You can sign up completely free for 30 days and potentially beyond if you would like to join us and join the online community of inclusive individuals that do want to share and learn and give to one another. So thank you very, very much, all of you. It's been gratefully appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Thanks so much. My name's Layla McKenzie Dallas, and you've been listening to the Dial Global virtual panel. We're with you now pretty much every week, so make sure you check us out online, and I will look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you very much, Paul, Wayne and Colin. You've just been superstars today, so thank you again.